I never thought keeping a few beehives in my backyard would turn into an all-out war with my HOA at first. It was just a hobby. I'd always been fascinated by bees, the way they work together, their importance in pollination, the quiet hum that made a backyard feel alive. I didn't see it as anything more than a peaceful pastime. My neighbors didn't seem to mind either. In fact, most of them loved the idea. Their gardens flourished, fruit trees produced more, and every now and then I'd gift jars of fresh honey. People would smile, thank me, and tell me it was the best honey they'd ever had. But there was one person who hated it. The HOA president. She saw my hives as some sort of threat. She claimed the bees were dangerous, that they didn't belong in a suburban neighborhood, and that they violated HOA guidelines. The first time she showed up at my door, she was holding a violation notice in one hand and a smug smile on her face. "These need to be gone by the end of the week," she said, pointing past me toward my backyard. "We can't have swarms of insects threatening our community." I tried to explain calmly. "They're not threatening anyone. They're docile honeybees. They're pollinating the neighborhood's plants. Nobody has complained except you." She scoffed, thrust the notice at me, and walked away without another word. That was the beginning. From then on, she came after me relentlessly. Fines stacked up. Letters piled in my mailbox. Every HOA meeting seemed to include some attack about my reckless beekeeping. At first, I thought it was just ignorance. Maybe she didn't understand bees. Maybe she was afraid. But as time went on, it became clear it wasn't about the bees. It was about control. She hated that I wasn't bending to her will. The more she pushed, the more determined I became. I invested in more hives. I learned everything I could about proper care. I even registered my backyard as an official apiary. My honey production skyrocketed, and I started selling small batches online and at the farmer's market. What began as a hobby turned into a little side business. Meanwhile, she escalated. She accused me of causing allergies, of attracting killer bees, even of lowering property values. She tried to rally the neighbors against me, but it didn't work. Most of them knew the truth. They liked my honey. And they liked what the bees did for their plants. The tipping point came one afternoon when I caught her in my backyard, standing dangerously close to the hives with a can of pesticide in her hand. I shouted, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. She muttered something about just checking for safety, then stormed off before I could stop her. That's when I realized she wasn't just trying to fine me into submission. She was trying to destroy everything I'd built. That night, as I sat looking at jars of honey lined up on my kitchen counter, I made a decision. If she wanted a fight, I'd give her one. But I wouldn't fight with anger or by breaking rules. No, I'd use patience, strategy, and the same thing bees use to survive: persistence. What she didn't know was that my little honey hobby was about to grow into something much bigger. And before it was over, the very business she tried to shut down would become the one thing that completely destroyed her grip on the HOA. Word of mouth spread faster than I expected. At first, I was just selling honey to a few neighbors who enjoyed the extra sweetness for their tea or toast. Then one of them mentioned me to a coworker. Another shared my jars with family, and suddenly, I had people I'd never met knocking on my door asking if they could buy honey. It didn't take long for me to realize that this wasn't just a hobby anymore. My small setup in the backyard wasn't enough to keep up with the demand. So, I expanded. I built 2 more hives, then 4. I started branding my jars, experimenting with flavors, even making beeswax candles. The money I was bringing in from something so simple shocked me. Every weekend at the farmer's market, I sold out faster and faster. But of course, the HOA president wasn't about to let me enjoy any of it. The more successful I became, the more furious she grew. She slapped Me with another violation, this time claiming I was running a business on residential property. She even showed up at a market once, arms crossed, glaring at me from across the lot as I handed honey jars to smiling customers. When she couldn't stop me with fines, she switched tactics. She spread rumors that my bees had stung children in the neighborhood. Total lies. I kept meticulous records, dates, inspections, medical proof that no incidents were linked to my hives. Still, she wouldn't let up. It became almost laughable. While she wasted her energy trying to take me down, my little business kept growing. I got an offer from a local cafe to supply their honey, then a bakery, then a small chain of organic grocery stores wanted to test my product. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy with bees in his backyard, was the owner of a full-blown honey business. And here's the part that really started to sting her. The neighbors she thought would rally against me. They became my customers. Some even joined in, offering to help with deliveries or recommending me to friends. Every jar I sold made her look weaker. Every compliment my honey received made her crusade against me look more ridiculous. Then came the day everything shifted. At a community meeting, the HOA treasurer presented the financials. The HOA was in trouble-deep debt from over the top. Landscaping projects wasted funds on pointless renovations. And legal fees from disputes the president herself had fueled. I watched her face that night. For the first time, she wasn't smug. She was nervous. She knew she was losing her grip, but she still didn't know that I was just getting started. Because while she obsessed over my bees, I had been quietly saving, expanding, and building something bigger than she could imagine. And soon enough, the money from my honey would give me the one thing she could never take back: control over the very HOA she ruled like a dictator. The day after that HOA meeting, I couldn't get the numbers out of my head. They weren't just struggling, they were drowning. The landscaping company had billed them for overpriced contracts. The community beautification project was half finished and abandoned, and the HOA had even taken out loans to cover legal disputes they lost. All of it added up to a mountain of debt. Now, here's where it got interesting. The HOA was in debt to local banks, but also to some of the very neighbors they represented. Turns out, when they needed quick cash, they borrowed from members. Reserve funds with promises to pay it back. Spoiler alert, they never did. This was the crack in the armor I needed. While the president still strutted around like she was in control, she didn't realize that money speaks louder than rules. And I had money, now real money. My honey business was thriving. I'd expanded my production, upgraded equipment, and even rented a small warehouse outside the neighborhood. Orders were coming in from all over town. Restaurants, coffee shops, health stores, they all wanted my honey. The business had grown so much that I hired 2 part-time workers to help me package and deliver with every sale. I set aside a portion of profits, not just to reinvest in the business, but for something bigger. I started discreetly buying up the HOA's debt. Piece by piece, dollar by dollar, I was becoming their biggest creditor. Of course, I kept quiet about it. The last thing I wanted was for the president to know my plan too soon. She was still sending me violation letters, still trying to paint me as the villain, still banging her gavel at every meeting like she was queen of the block. Meanwhile, I was slipping the crown right out from under her. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about the principle. For months, she'd treated me like I was beneath her, like my bees were some disgusting nuisance. But the truth, my bees were saving my end. They were about to save the neighborhood too. The irony made me laugh sometimes. While she wasted HOA funds fighting petty battles, I was quietly stabilizing the finances she let collapse. While she called my bees a curse, their honey had turned into gold by the time she finally noticed something was off. It was too late. The treasurer started hinting that a new investor was helping cover debts. She looked confused, maybe even suspicious, but she never once suspected it was me. Not yet. Anyway, because the real twist was coming soon, the moment when I would step forward, reveal my ownership of the HOA's debts, and watch her perfect little empire crumble in front of everyone. It happened during what was supposed to be a routine HOA meeting. The president walked in like always, heels clicking against the tile floor, a smug grin plastered on her face, binder of violations tucked under her arm. She loved waving that binder around, handing out fines like candy on Halloween. But that night, the room felt different. Neighbors were restless. Whispers passed between rows of folding chairs. The treasurer looked nervous. The secretary kept fidgeting. And even the president's usually loyal board members avoided eye contact with her. She slammed her gavel and started talking about new fees the community needed to cover debts. Her plan: increase everyone's dues. Again, people groaned out loud this time. One man stood up and shouted, "Where's all the money going?" Another neighbor demanded an explanation for why landscaping was half finished, and why the HOA still owed thousands. The president's face tightened, but she tried to hold control. "We've had some unexpected expenses," she said smoothly. "But rest assured, your board has everything under control." That was my moment. I rose from my seat, calm as ever, with a folder in my hand. "Actually," I said, my voice steady but carrying across the room, "you don't have everything under control." "I do." Every head turned toward me. The president's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" she snapped. I stepped forward and laid my paperwork on the table. "For months, while you were wasting money on petty battles and projects you couldn't finish, I've been buying up the HOA's debts, piece by piece, loan by loan, bill by bill. And as of last week, I pulled out the final document and slid it across the table toward her. I own the majority of what this HOA owes." The treasurer leaned over, eyes wide, reading the papers. The secretary gasped. The room erupted into murmurs. The president turned red, her hands trembling as she grabbed the papers. This isn't possible." She stammered. "Oh, it's very possible," I said. "You've been so focused on punishing me and my bees. You didn't even see me quietly taking control of the very foundation you've been standing on. You don't own this neighborhood. You don't own me. In fact, I let the silence hang in the air for dramatic effect. You work for me now." The neighbors burst into laughter and applause. Some actually stood up and clapped. The president tried banging her gavel to regain order, but it only made her look more desperate. Her voice cracked as she shouted about rules, authority, and power. But power had already shifted. Everyone in that room knew it. The bees she hated had built the business that bought out her debts. And now, I wasn't just her neighbor with hives in the backyard, was the man who owned the very leash around her HOA's neck. The room went dead silent as the president tried to spin her way out of the corner she'd been backed into. Her usual smug tone was gone. Instead, she sounded shaky, almost desperate. You can't just take over the HOA like this." She sputtered, waving her gavel in the air like it was some kind of shield. "The board will never allow it." I leaned forward, calm and collected. "Actually, the board doesn't have a choice. By the bylaws you've loved quoting so much, any entity holding majority financial stake in the HOA has full authority in negotiations and restructuring. That entity is me." The treasurer finally spoke up, his voice low but firm. "He's right. We've been drowning in debt for years. If he's taken it on, he has controlling power. That makes him the biggest stakeholder here." The president froze. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. Her face went pale. Her gavel slipped from her hand, and it clattered loudly onto the table. The neighbors erupted into cheers. People stood, clapping, laughing, some even hugging each other. Years of frustration poured out in that single moment of victory. They weren't just happy to see her lose. They were relieved to finally be free from her chokehold. I raised my voice above the noise. This neighborhood deserves better. No more bogus fines. No more harassment. From now on, our HOA serves the people who actually live here, not the ego of one person drunk on power. That night, the vote was quick. The board members, sensing the shift, unanimously ousted the president. She tried to argue, but her words bounced off walls that no longer carried her authority. She walked out of the room red-faced, clutching her binder like a life raft. But everyone knew it was over. The next morning, my bees buzzed in the warm sunlight, their hives thriving. What she once saw as a nuisance had built an empire of honey, jars, loyal customers, and steady income, enough to flip the script entirely. And the best part, the same bees she wanted gone, had indirectly saved the entire neighborhood. Neighbors started coming to me with ideas: gardens, parks, real improvements for the community. The atmosphere changed almost overnight. For the first time in years, people actually felt proud of where they lived. As for the former president, she couldn't stand living in a community where she was no longer queen. Within a few months, her house went up for sale. She moved out quietly, without a word, and me. Every morning, when I sipped my tea sweetened with the honey, my bees worked. For I can't help but smile, because this story isn't just about bees or honey or HOA politics. It's about patience, persistence, and how sometimes the quiet work you do in the background, like bees in a hive, builds enough strength to topple even the loudest bully. At the end of the day, the lesson is simple. People who live to tear others down eventually end up building their own downfall. And those who stay patient, focused, and determined, they win in ways no one sees coming. The HOA president thought she could crush me and my bees. Instead, my bees built the honey that bought out her debts and her pride. And that's how the man she once mocked as the beekeeper became the very person who owned every inch of control she once abused.